My name is Diane Calloway. I'm 41 years old. I'm a single mother, an office administrator, and for most of my life, I have been the person in my family who holds things together while everyone else moves freely through the world. I want to tell you about the moment I woke up in a hospital bed and realized my 9-year-old daughter was alone at home. Not because of a car accident or a sudden emergency that no one could have predicted. Just because her grandparents had concert tickets and decided not to miss the show. I need you to stay with me through this story, because the moment I'm about to describe is not the beginning. It is the end of something very long, and to understand why it shattered me the way it did, you need to understand everything that came before it. But first, let me tell you what I woke up to. It was a Saturday morning. The hospital ward smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, and the particular dryness of a building where the heating is always slightly too high. I had been in surgery 3 days earlier for a ruptured appendix. Emergency surgery, the kind where a nurse holds your hand and talks to you calmly while your body is doing something frightening and there is no time to prepare. I opened my eyes slowly. The ceiling above me was white and flat. My mouth was dry. My abdomen felt heavy and sore in a way that was distant enough to be managed but present enough to remind me it was there. A nurse was checking the monitor beside my bed. I asked her about Lily. Lily is my daughter. She is 9 years old, and she had been admitted to the pediatric ward 2 floors above me 2 days before my own emergency, with a severe respiratory infection. She had been on IV antibiotics. She had been monitored. I had arranged, before I was taken to surgery, for my parents to come and stay with her, to be present for any decisions, to be the adult in the room when I could not be. The nurse told me that Lily had been discharged the previous afternoon. I felt relief first. Discharged meant better. Discharged meant the infection had responded to treatment. I asked if my parents had taken her home. The nurse said she believed so. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. I called my mother. She answered after 2 rings. Her voice was easy, relaxed. When the voice of someone who has had a pleasant evening and slept well. "Oh, she's fine," she said. "We dropped her at the house." The house. I understood those words individually. I did not understand them together for a full 2 seconds. Then I did. My house. Our house. The house where no adult lives except me. The house where Lily and I live alone. The house that was, at that moment, occupied only by my 9-year-old daughter who had been discharged from hospital less than 24 hours ago. "Mom." My voice came out very quiet. "Who is with her?" A brief pause. "She's fine, Diane. She's a sensible girl. She had her phone." I ended the call. My hands were not shaking. They were very still. I think sometimes the body goes still when the mind cannot absorb something quickly enough. I called Lily's mobile phone. It rang 4 times. I counted each one. She answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was small and careful, the voice children use when they are trying to sound older than they are. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you at home?" "Yes." I made myself a sandwich. I closed my eyes for a moment. "That's good. That's really good, Lily. Are you okay?" "I'm okay. I didn't call because I thought I might get in trouble." She thought she would get in trouble for calling her mother from an empty house while recovering from a hospital stay. She was 9 years old. She had been alone for 16 hours. I pressed the phone against my ear, and I lay back on the hospital pillow, and I listened to her breathe. She started telling me about a television program she had watched. I let her talk. I said yes, and I see, and that sounds funny in the right places. And while she talked, something changed inside me. Not broke. Changed. The way a bone changes when it finally sets after being left to heal crooked for too long. I want to tell you who I am and where this started. One, because that phone call was not an accident. It was the result of decades of decisions my family had been making about who I was and what I was for. I grew up the eldest of two children. My brother Kevin is 5 years younger than me. My parents are both in their late 60s. My father spent most of his working life as a builder. My mother was a homemaker when we were young and later worked part-time in a community shop in our town. They are, by most external measures, to pleasant and sociable people. My mother in particular has always been described by neighbors and family friends as warm, generous, the kind of woman you could count on. Inside our house, the description required some adjustments. I was the capable child. That was my designation, established early and maintained consistently. I cooked on the evenings my mother was tired. I helped with Kevin's homework. When I managed my own emotions without much help or encouragement, because the emotional resources in our household flowed in a specific direction, and it was not toward me. When something was difficult for Kevin, both parents attended to it. When something was difficult for me, I was expected to manage it, and managing it was treated as evidence that I had been right to be left to manage it. My parents took pride in describing me as the strong one. They said it with genuine affection, and they meant it as a compliment. What they did not understand, or chose not to examine, was that a child who appears strong is sometimes simply a child who has learned that being anything else is not an option available to her. The neglect in my childhood was not the dramatic kind. There was no cruelty. There were no raised voices directed at me specifically. There was simply a consistent pattern of my needs being treated as less urgent, less interesting, and less deserving of the family's attention than Kevin's. That pattern, repeated over years, becomes something structural. It becomes the architecture of how a person understands themselves and what they are allowed to expect from the people who love them. And that architecture, built in childhood, is exactly what allowed what happened in that hospital to happen. I want to tell you about 3 specific moments from across my life, not because I want to catalog grievances, but because I need you to feel the accumulation before I tell you about the hospital, because the hospital did not come from nowhere. I was 14 years old when I first understood, clearly and without doubt, that my emotional life was not considered a priority in my family. I had been struggling with anxiety for most of that school year. Not dramatic anxiety, not the kind that stopped me functioning, but a persistent low-level dread that sat behind everything I did and made ordinary things feel harder than they should have been. I had trouble sleeping. I felt my heart beat too fast in lessons when teachers asked questions. I avoided certain situations in ways that I didn't have words for at 14. On a Tuesday evening in March, I sat down beside my mother in the living room while my father was in the kitchen and Kevin was upstairs. I told her I had been feeling worried a lot, that I didn't always know why, that it had been going on for a while and I thought she should know. She listened. She did look at me. She wasn't dismissive in an obvious way. She said after a moment, "You're sensitive, Diane. You need to toughen up. It's just part of growing up." That was it. The conversation was over. She turned back to the television. The following month, Kevin had a falling out with a friend at school, a normal, unremarkable dispute between 12-year-old boys. My parents spent an entire weekend discussing it. My father called the other boy's father. My mother spoke to Kevin's teacher. There were conversations at the dinner table and reassurances offered, and the situation was handled with full family attention. I watched all of it and I said nothing, because I had already learned the lesson available to me. The second moment came when I was 26. Lily was a few weeks old. Her father had already made it clear that he was not going to be a consistent presence, and I was navigating early single motherhood with a combination of determination and genuine exhaustion that I don't think I fully acknowledged to myself at the time. I had a mandatory training course for work, 1 week long, that I could not miss without serious professional consequences. I needed childcare for that week. I called my parents and asked if they could help. Not for a month. 1 week. My father told me they had already committed to a holiday with Kevin and his new partner, a trip they had booked just weeks earlier, after I had already made my request. He was not unkind about it. He explained the situation clearly and expressed that he hoped I could find an arrangement. He seemed genuinely sorry for the inconvenience. I paid for a childminder that week. The cost was more than I could comfortably manage. I said nothing to my parents about the cost. I said nothing about the fact that their holiday had been booked after my request. I said, "No problem, I'll sort it." Because I always sorted it. That was my role. The third moment I want to tell you about is smaller in scale but sits differently in my memory. Lily was 5 years old. It was Christmas. We were at my parents' house with Kevin and his family. When the children opened their gifts from their grandparents, Kevin's children received substantial, carefully chosen presents. Books and games and toys that clearly reflected knowledge of what they liked and what they were into. Lily's gift was smaller. A generic set of colored pencils and a small notebook. Lily was 5. She didn't notice the difference. She thanked her grandparents and opened the pencils and was happy. I noticed. I sat with it for the rest of the afternoon. I said nothing, because I had learned across 30 years of this pattern that pointing it out would result in being told I was imagining it, or being oversensitive, or making the occasion about myself. So I watched my daughter draw with her new pencils, and I held the feeling somewhere in my chest and I added it to the collection of things I was holding. If any part of this resonates with you, if you have ever been the one in your family who is expected to hold things together while everyone else was held, please stay with me. Because what happens next is what all of this was building toward. By the time I was in my mid-30s, I had built a stable, if tight, life. I worked full-time as an office administrator at a healthcare company. I managed our rent, Lily's school costs, her medical appointments, her activities, and the constant background administration of a household run by one person on one salary. Lily's father sent money when he remembered, which was 3 or 4 times a year, and in amounts that didn't come close to covering his share. I did not chase it. I moved forward. Despite all of this, I continued to support my parents in the ways that were asked of me, or rather communicated to me in the way my family communicated need. Not a direct request. A sigh on the phone. A mentioned difficulty. A statement that things were tight this month. I had been trained from childhood to read these signals and respond to them, and so I did. When my father's van broke down, he mentioned it on a Sunday call in the tone of someone sharing a difficulty with no expectation of help. I offered. I transferred £500 into his account the following day. When my mother needed dental treatment that her insurance didn't fully cover, she mentioned the gap cost on a phone call, and I covered it. £650. When Kevin had a difficult period financially, my parents mentioned it across several calls with a quiet regularity that communicated, without ever saying directly, that they hoped I would do something. I sent Kevin £800 I could not spare because not sending it felt like abandonment, and I had never been able to tolerate that feeling. I was raising a child alone on a modest income. I was sending money to my parents. I was covering family gaps. I was managing everything. And my parents, in return, were present in the ways that suited them. They came to Lily's school events occasionally, and they were available by phone. They described themselves, to anyone who asked, as supportive grandparents. In their own understanding, that was probably true. But support that disappears the moment it becomes inconvenient is not really support. It is the performance of support. And the difference between those two things matters enormously when you are a single mother who has placed her trust in the wrong hands at the wrong moment. I need to tell you about the night I was admitted to hospital, and because that is where everything changes. It was a Thursday evening in October. Lily had been admitted to the pediatric ward the previous day with a respiratory infection. She had been running a high fever for 2 days that hadn't responded to the medication I had been giving her at home, and when she started struggling to breathe comfortably, the doctor at the walk-in clinic sent us straight to the hospital. She was put on IV antibiotics and placed on monitoring. I stayed beside her bed all of Thursday, drinking bad coffee and watching her chest rise and fall and telling myself she was going to be fine. By Thursday evening, I was in significant pain myself. An abdominal pain that had started dully a few days earlier and had been building quietly while I was focused entirely on Lily. By 8 in the evening, it was sharp, and I was struggling to stand straight. A nurse on the pediatric ward noticed me and asked if I was all right. And I told her I had some stomach pain. She took one look at me and called someone. I was taken to the emergency department and assessed within the hour. Ruptured appendix. Surgery required immediately. Not in the morning. Now. Before they took me to the operating theater, I was given 20 minutes to make arrangements. I called my mother. My hands were shaking, and the fluorescent lights of the emergency department were very bright, and I was genuinely frightened. "Mom, I need you to come. Right now. I'm in hospital. I need surgery tonight, and Lily is upstairs in the pediatric ward, and she can't be alone." "Oh my goodness. Diane." "Yes. We're coming." Her voice was immediate and present. No hesitation. "She's in Ward 4 on the 3rd floor. They need an adult listed on her file. Tell them you're her guardian while I'm in surgery. Make sure you stay with her. We'll be there. We're leaving now." I was taken to surgery. They arrived 2 hours later, which I was told by a nurse the following day. They stayed that night. On the second day, while I was in recovery and communicating through brief text messages, I checked in. "How is Lily?" I typed. "Fine. She's asking for you, but she's okay." "Are you staying tonight?" "Of course." 2 words. Of course. I read them on my phone screen with the IV still in my arm and the pain medication making everything slightly soft at the edges, and I felt the particular relief of a mother who knows her child is being watched over. I should not have felt that relief. But I didn't know that yet. On the afternoon of that second day, the pediatric ward contacted the responsible adult on Lily's file, my mother. They told her that Lily's infection had responded well to the antibiotics, that her fever had broken and her breathing had normalized, and that she could be discharged if her guardian was able to take her home and manage the remainder of her treatment with oral medication. My mother said yes to the discharge. She took Lily from the ward. She drove her to our house. She let them both in with the spare key I had given her years ago for emergencies. She made sure there was food visible in the kitchen. She showed Lily where her oral medication was and told her to take it at the right times. Then she left. She and my father had tickets to a concert they had bought months earlier, a band they both liked. The event was that evening. She had decided not to miss it. She did not tell me she was leaving. She sent no message. She did not call a neighbor or a friend or anyone else to sit with Lily. She did not inform the ward that she was leaving a 9-year-old child alone. She simply left. And my daughter, recently discharged from hospital after a serious infection. I spent the night and the following morning alone in our house until I found out what had happened. Lily made herself a sandwich. She watched television. She didn't call me because she was afraid she would get in trouble. She was 9 years old. I want to tell you what I did when I understood what had happened, because my response is the part of this story that I am most proud of. I did not scream. I did not call my mother back and say the things I was feeling. I lay in my hospital bed with my phone in my hand and I made one call. To my neighbor Ruth. Ruth is 63 years old and a retired nurse, and she has lived next door to us for 7 years. She has Lily's school pickup schedule in her phone and a spare key to our house, and a manner that is so practically warm it feels like the most reliable thing in the world. I told her only what was essential. I told her Lily was alone at home, and I needed someone to go there immediately. Ruth was at our house in 8 minutes. I know because she texted me when she arrived. The text said, "I'm here. She's fine. She's having a snack. Don't worry." I lay back on my pillow. I stared at the ceiling. The ward was quiet. Someone down the hall was coughing softly and a monitor was beeping at a steady low rhythm. I held my phone on my chest and I breathed. Then I did something I had never done before. I opened my mother's text message thread and I took a screenshot. The message asking if she was staying. The 2 words. Of course. I screenshotted it. Then I went to the hospital's patient administration and requested a copy of Lily's discharge paperwork, which would show the time she was released and the name of the responsible adult who authorized it. I asked a nurse how to submit that request formally. She helped me. I did not know exactly what I was going to do with these things. I only knew that I was not going to let the story be revised. I was not going to allow my mother to call me in 3 days and describe this as a judgment call that any reasonable person might have made. I was not going to absorb this the way I had absorbed everything else for 41 years. 3 decisions formed in my mind clearly and without anger, just with the particular cold steadiness of a person who has finally seen something in full. First, I would not pretend this did not happen. Second, I would not allow the version of events to be managed by the people who had the most to lose from the truth. Third, I would make sure the people who needed to know knew. I did not act on any of these immediately. I focused on getting well enough to go home to my daughter. But the decisions were made, and made decisions, I have learned, have a weight to them that changes how you carry yourself. Ruth stayed with Lily until I was discharged 3 days later. When I arrived home and Lily ran to me in the hallway and buried her face in my side, I held her for a long time, and I did not let go until she did. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Ruth and I sat at my kitchen table with tea. She told me exactly what she had found when she arrived that night. Lily in her pajamas on the sofa, the television on, a plate with a half-eaten sandwich on the coffee table. The house was fine. Lily was physically fine. But Ruth had spent enough years as a nurse to know the difference between a child who is fine and a child who has been frightened and has decided not to show it. Ruth's expression when she finished telling me said the things she was choosing not to say out loud. We sat with it for a moment. "There's a birthday party," she said eventually. "Your father's 70th. 3 weeks from now." "I know. A lot of people will be there. People who think very highly of your parents. People who have been told certain things about your family." She wasn't telling me what to do. Ruth never tells anyone what to do. She was simply making an observation. She has a way of pointing at things without touching them, and the pointing is usually enough. She also gave me the name of a family welfare advisor she knew through her years of nursing, a woman who worked with families in situations involving children and duty of care. I made an appointment that week. The advisor reviewed what I described and confirmed, carefully and professionally, that what my parents had done constituted a serious failure of duty of care toward a child in a vulnerable position. She advised me on my options, including formal safeguarding documentation, and said that whatever I decided to do, I should keep every piece of evidence I had gathered. I kept it all. Every screenshot, every document, every message. And I thought about my father's birthday. My father was turning 70. The celebration had been planned for months. A function room at a local pub, 30 guests, a sit-down meal, relatives from both sides of the family friends who had known my parents since before I was born, Kevin and his family, and a woman named Carol, a family friend in her 70s, who had known us all for decades, and who, on every occasion I could remember, described my parents as a wonderful example of devoted grandparents. She used that word often. Devoted. I arrived with Lily, who was fully recovered and in good spirits, and completely unaware of the full weight of what I was carrying into that room. I had dressed carefully, not to impress, to feel steady in myself. Lily wore a dress she had chosen and her hair was down, and she looked healthy and ordinary and entirely like herself. The evening moved through its sequence. The room was warm and smelled of pub food and the specific closeness of a gathering of people who have known each other a long time. Speeches began as the meal ended. Kevin stood and gave a warm tribute to his parents, mentioning their reliability and their love and the specific ways they had supported him through his life. The room applauded. Then Carol stood. She is a small woman with a clear voice and great confidence in her own observations. She spoke about my parents as grandparents. She described how fortunate the grandchildren were to have such steady, available people in their corner. She said the word devoted with the satisfaction of someone who has used the right word. She sat down to warm applause. I waited until the room had settled. Then I stood. I did not have notes. I did not need them. I knew exactly what I was going to say because I had said it to myself every day for 3 weeks. "Thank you all for being here for Dad's birthday," I said. My voice was even. It did not shake. I love my father and I mean that genuinely, and I'm glad we're here together. I paused for just a moment. I want to share something that happened recently, because several people this evening have spoken about my parents' role in Lily's life, and I think the people in this room deserve to have the full picture. The room was already quiet. It became quieter. I described the hospital stay. I described Lily's admission and my own emergency. And I described calling my mother from the emergency department before surgery. I described the text message exchange. The 2 words. Of course. I described Lily being discharged and driven home and left alone at 9 years old, recently ill, while her grandparents attended a concert. I did not exaggerate. I did not raise my voice. I did not use emotional language designed to provoke a reaction. I simply stated what happened, in sequence. What to 30 people who had spent the evening speaking about my parents as devoted grandparents. Then I sat down and took Lily's hand. The room was completely still. Carol, who had used the word devoted, was looking at her hands in her lap. Kevin was staring at the table with his jaw tight. My mother's face was composed in the careful, controlled way of someone managing something very strong beneath the surface. My father was not looking at anything. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then the room began to move again, slowly, in the way a room does when it needs to continue existing after something has shifted inside it. I did not stay long after that. I said goodbye to my father privately, briefly, and I meant it. Then I took Lily's hand and we left. The calls came in the days after. I had expected them. My mother called on Monday morning. Her voice was controlled and her argument was prepared. She said she had left food in the kitchen. She said Lily had her phone. She said she had made a judgment call based on how well Lily seemed and that she didn't think it was fair for Diane to present it the way she had. She said the concert was something they had planned for months. I let her finish. Then I said quietly and clearly, "Mom, she was 9 years old. She had been discharged from hospital the same day. She was alone for 16 hours. I don't think there is a framing that makes that acceptable." Then I said goodbye and ended the call. She called back. I did not answer. My father called on Wednesday evening. He was quieter. He did not build an argument or present a case. He said he was sorry. He said it plainly, without elaborate justification. It was not a full accounting of what had happened, but it was real. I accepted it for what it was, which was a beginning, and I did not pretend it had resolved everything. Kevin sent a message. He said I had no right to bring private family matters into a birthday party. I read it once, set my phone down, and did not reply. Some messages don't deserve a response. That was one of them. In the weeks after, several relatives reached out privately. Two expressed direct support. One, my father's younger sister, Aunt Barbara, called to say she had noticed for many years that Diane was treated differently in the family and that she regretted not saying something before. She said she was sorry. I thanked her. The conversation was short and genuine, and I held it carefully afterward. And I also met with a solicitor to understand what formal options existed regarding the safeguarding incident. She reviewed my documentation and outlined my choices. I did not pursue formal action at that time, but I kept everything. Every screenshot, every discharge record, every message, filed and dated and stored carefully. Because documentation is how a person protects herself when she knows the people around her are capable of revising the truth. Nay, the power that shifted during this period was not power over my parents. I did not want that. What shifted was the story. The version of my parents as devoted, reliable grandparents, the version that had been spoken confidently by well-meaning people for years, was now complicated by the knowledge of what had actually happened. That complication could not be undone, and its permanence was, in its quiet way, a form of justice. I want to tell you about where I am now, because this story does not end with a clean resolution, and I would not want you to expect one. Life does not work that way. Families don't work that way. I am still in therapy. I had seen someone briefly a few years earlier and returned after the hospital event. In our sessions, I have been working through something specific and long-standing. The way I was trained from childhood to treat my own well-being as secondary to everyone else's, and how that training extended, naturally and dangerously, to my willingness to accept inadequate care for Lily. Understanding the source of a pattern doesn't immediately break it, but understanding it is where breaking it begins. I reflected, in those sessions, on the money I had sent over the years, the van repair, the dental treatment, Kevin's £800, the childcare I had paid for alone because my parents had already committed to a holiday, the years of filling gaps without acknowledgement. I don't regret loving my family. I regret the terms on which I allowed that love to be expressed and received. What has changed is the terms. I had a quiet, specific conversation with my parents in which I told them what I needed from them in order for us to continue a genuine relationship. I told them clearly. I did not raise my voice. I did not present it as an ultimatum in an angry sense. I simply told them the truth of what I needed. Some of what I asked for, they have been able to offer. Some of it, then I'm not sure they are capable of offering. I have adjusted my expectations accordingly, not with bitterness, but with the practical honesty of a person who has finally seen the situation clearly. My mother and I speak. It is careful and boundaried in a way it was never boundaried before. My father and I have Sunday evening calls that are short and real and carry something I had not experienced before the birthday party. He asks about Lily with genuine attention. He listens to the answers. Kevin and I have not spoken since his message. I remain open to that changing if he chooses to change it. I am not waiting. But here is the thing I come back to most often, the thing that sits at the center of everything I have been telling you. Lily is fine. She is healthy and secure and unscarred by that night in any way that I can see. She is loud and funny and specific about what she wants for dinner, and deeply opinionated about which television programs are worth watching. She does not know the full story of what happened, and she does not need to. What she knows is that her mother is present and honest, and that the house they live in is safe. That is enough. That is everything. Have you ever been the person in your family who was trusted to manage, expected to give, and rarely asked how you were doing? If so, leave a comment. I'd really like to hear from you, because I think there are more of us than anyone admits. On a Sunday morning in late November, Lily and I were at the kitchen table doing a puzzle. It was a 500-piece puzzle of a map of the world, and we had been working on it across 3 weekends and we were close to finishing. Ruth was coming for tea at 3 o'clock. The house smelled of the bread I had made that morning, and the heating was on, and the light through the kitchen window was the low, clear light of a late autumn morning. Lily looked up from the puzzle. She had been concentrating on a section of the Atlantic Ocean, and she had the particular expression she gets when she is about to say something that has nothing to do with what she appears to be doing. She said, "Mom, you're my best person." I held that for a moment. I did not deflect it. I did not say, "Oh, stop, or you're being silly." I did not minimize it the way I had been taught, as a child, to minimize the things that mattered most to me. I said, "You're mine too." And I meant it completely. I with my whole self, without qualification. I spent most of my life being taught that I was the strong one. It took almost losing my daughter to understand what strength is actually for. It is not for absorbing other people's failures quietly. It is for protecting the people who are yours.